My name is Ava Thompson, and I was 29 years old when my mother asked the question that finally cracked our family open. It happened on Christmas night, right after dessert, while everyone was still laughing about my sister's wedding like it had been the royal event of Illinois. My mother lifted her glass, smiled at me across the dining table, and said, "Julia's wedding was beautiful, wasn't it? So, Ava, when's yours?" My fork stopped halfway to my plate. My father chuckled like it was harmless. My sister leaned back with that tiny, satisfied smile she always wore when she thought the spotlight had nowhere else to go. I looked at all of them, the parents who had spent a year obsessing over Julia's flowers, Julia's dress, Julia's venue, Julia's happiness, and I said calmly, "I already had mine." The room went quiet so fast it felt like someone had unplugged Christmas. My mother blinked. "What?" I folded my napkin beside my plate. "I got married in October. You got invitations." My father's face hardened. "Ava, we never got any invitations." That was when I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I had carried in silence for 3 months. Delivery receipts, signature confirmations, photos of the envelopes, every single one signed for at this house. And when I saw the name on the first receipt, I finally understood exactly who had buried my wedding before it ever reached my family. Before I tell you what she said, and what happened after I stood up from that Christmas table, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. I did not grow up dreaming about a giant wedding. I grew up dreaming about being seen without having to perform for it. That might sound small, but in the Thompson family, attention was never shared equally. It was assigned. My sister Julia was the bright one, the dramatic one, the daughter who cried loudly, laughed louder, and somehow turned every family occasion into a stage built just for her. I was the dependable one, the quiet one, the daughter who remembered appointments, cleaned up after arguments, sent birthday gifts on behalf of people who forgot, and smiled whenever someone said, "Ava understands." By 29, I had built a life that had nothing to do with competing with Julia. I worked in Chicago as a vintage bridal restoration manager, which meant I spent my days rescuing old wedding gowns from yellowed lace, broken seams, and decades of silence. There was something poetic about that, even if I never said it out loud. I repaired dresses that families treasured, while my own family barely noticed the life I was building. Then I met Maxwell Bennett, though everyone called him Max. He was patient, funny in a dry way, and the first person who never treated my calmness like emptiness. When he proposed, he didn't do it in front of a crowd. He did it in my apartment, beside a half-restored 1950s satin gown, with coffee on the table and rain tapping against the windows. He said, "I don't want a performance. I want a life with you." That was the easiest yes I had ever given. We planned a small October wedding at a historic courthouse in Oak Park, followed by dinner at a private room in a little Italian restaurant where the owner knew Max's family. It was intimate, warm, elegant, and completely mine. I still wanted my family there. Despite everything, I wanted my mother to see me in my ivory silk dress. I wanted my father to walk me down the short aisle. I even wanted Julia there, not as a rival, not as the center of attention, but as my sister. So I sent invitations, real ones, not digital messages that could be ignored, thick cream envelopes with handwritten names. I mailed one to my parents' house for Mom and Dad, one to Julia at the same address because she had temporarily moved back in after her lease ended, and one to my aunt, who lived 3 streets away. I even paid extra for signature confirmation because the invitations included private venue details. At the time, I told myself I was being organized. Looking back, I think some part of me already knew I needed proof. Weeks passed. No one responded. No call from my mother. No confused text from my father, no sarcastic comment from Julia, nothing. When I finally asked Mom whether she had checked the mail lately, she brushed me off and said she was drowning in final details for Julia's wedding album party. Yes, an album party. Julia had already had the wedding, the bridal shower, the rehearsal dinner, the morning after brunch, and still my mother was helping her host a gathering just to show people photos of the wedding everyone had already attended. I almost told her right then. I almost said, "Mom, I'm getting married too." But she interrupted me to ask whether dusty rose napkins looked too casual beside champagne-colored plates. I remember staring at my phone, feeling something inside me step backward. Not break, just step back. That was the moment I stopped chasing a place in their excitement. Max noticed. "We can call them again," he said gently. "We can drive over." I told him no. I said if my family wanted to be part of my life, they could open an envelope, read a date, and show up. It was the lowest possible test, and somehow, they failed it. Our wedding day came on a bright October afternoon. I walked down the aisle with my best friend beside me instead of my father. Max's mother cried enough for 3 people. His brother gave a toast that made me laugh until my ribs hurt. There was no dramatic entrance, no ballroom, no champagne tower, no family slideshow of childhood photos where Julia would have appeared in half the pictures anyway. There was just love. Clean, steady love. And still, when the photographer asked whether I wanted one more family portrait, my throat tightened. I looked at Max, and he understood without making me explain. "We'll make our own," he whispered. For 2 months, I said nothing. I did not post photos. I did not announce it at Thanksgiving because Julia had turned that into a second reception by bringing her wedding video on a flash drive and making everyone watch all 47 minutes. I waited until Christmas because Christmas was the one holiday my mother treated like a sacred performance of family unity. Matching plates, assigned seats, forced gratitude, polished lies. If the truth was going to enter that house, I wanted it to arrive in the middle of the illusion. Christmas dinner at my parents' house in Naperville looked exactly the way it always did. Too perfect from a distance, too tense up close. My mother had arranged red linen napkins into little bows. My father had put on the same green sweater he wore every December, and Julia had arrived 40 minutes late with a bottle of wine she did not pay for because my mother had Venmoed her that morning. I knew because Mom accidentally sent the payment request to me first, then followed it with, "Oops, ignore that, honey." I did ignore it. I had become very good at ignoring small proofs of unequal love. Max came with me, wearing a navy sweater and the calm expression of a man who knew he was walking into a room full of people who had chosen not to attend his wedding without even knowing they had chosen. He squeezed my hand before we stepped inside. "Whatever happens," he murmured, "you don't have to make yourself smaller tonight." I carried that sentence with me like a match in my pocket. For most of dinner, I let them talk. Julia talked about how people were still complimenting her wedding. My mother talked about how magical it had been when Julia walked down the aisle. My father talked about the cost like it was a badge of honor, mentioning the number 3 times before the roast was served. "Worth every penny," he said, smiling at Julia. A father only gets one chance to give his daughter that kind of day. Max's thumb brushed against my hand under the table. He knew. I knew. Julia knew too, though she pretended not to. That was the part I had not been able to prove until later. Her eyes kept flicking toward me every time marriage came up. Not with confusion, but with warning. Like she was silently telling me not to ruin her scene. After dessert, my mother brought out peppermint cheesecake and insisted we all say one thing we were grateful for. Julia said she was grateful for a family that shows up fully. I almost laughed. My father nodded proudly. My mother wiped at her eyes. Then Mom turned to me, still glowing from Julia's sentence, and delivered the question that had been waiting all night. So, Ava, after seeing how beautiful Julia's wedding was, when are we finally planning yours? Julia looked down at her plate, but I saw the corner of her mouth move. She expected me to dodge it. She expected me to swallow the humiliation the way I always had. Instead, I set my fork down. We're not planning it. My mother frowned. Why not? I looked directly at Julia first, then back at Mom. Because I already had mine. There are different kinds of silence. Some are peaceful, some are shocked. This one was guilty before anyone admitted why. My father's chair creaked as he sat forward. What do you mean you had yours? Max answered before I could. Ava and I got married on October 12th. My mother's face emptied. That's not funny. It isn't a joke, I said. We sent invitations. Dad's voice sharpened. No, you didn't. There it was. Not confusion. Accusation. My mother pressed a hand to her chest. Ava, I don't know what you're trying to prove, but we would never miss your wedding. I opened my bag. Julia's head snapped up. For the first time all night, she looked afraid. Not sad, not surprised. Afraid. I placed the folder on the table and opened it slowly. That's what I thought too. So I checked. I slid the first page toward my father. Invitation to William and Nancy Thompson, delivered September 10th. Signed for at 2:14 p.m. Dad took the paper, squinting. This doesn't make sense. I slid the second one over. Invitation to Julia Thompson. Same address. Delivered the same day. Signed for at 2:16 p.m. My mother whispered, Who signed? I turned the page around so she could see the enlarged signature. Julia's name sat there in black ink, loose and careless, like she had signed away my place in the family without even pressing hard. Nobody moved. The cheesecake sat untouched. The candles flickered. My father looked at Julia. Did you sign for these? Julia gave a short laugh, too quick and too high. I mean, maybe? I signed for a lot of packages around then. Mom was ordering centerpieces for the album party. I nodded. I thought you might say that. Then I took out the next page. So I called the delivery office. They sent me the scan. 3 envelopes. All signed by you. And then I found something else. Julia's face changed. My mother noticed. So did Dad. I pulled out my phone, opened the screenshot, and placed it in the middle of the table. It was a message Julia had sent to her friend Mara 2 days after the invitations arrived. I had gotten it because Mara, unlike Julia, still had a conscience. The message said, Ava actually sent wedding invites. I'm not giving them to Mom before my album night. She'll make it about Ava being simple and elegant, and I'm not dealing with that. Under it was another one. She probably wants a tiny wedding so everyone calls her mature. Let her have her secret little courthouse thing. My mother read it once, then again. My father removed his glasses. Julia whispered, That was private. I felt something cold and clean move through me. So was my wedding. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like if my family finally saw the truth. I thought it would be satisfying, maybe even freeing. But sitting at that Christmas table, watching my mother's face collapse, and my father's anger search for somewhere to land, I mostly felt tired. Not weak, not regretful. Just tired in the way a person feels after carrying a heavy box for so long that setting it down hurts too. Julia recovered first because Julia always recovered first. Okay, she said, lifting both hands like she was calming a room she had set on fire. That looks bad, but you're all acting like I committed a crime. I didn't destroy anything. Ava still had her wedding. Max's jaw tightened. I put one hand on his knee under the table. This was mine to answer. You didn't destroy the wedding, I said. You destroyed our chance to choose whether we shared it with our family. Julia rolled her eyes, and that one small gesture did more damage than any confession could have. My mother saw it. Really saw it. Julia, Mom said slowly, why didn't you give us the invitations? Julia's mouth opened, then closed. Because I knew what would happen. What would happen? Dad asked. His voice was low now, the kind of low that meant the room had run out of excuses. Julia pointed at me. This. Exactly this. Ava would turn it into some quiet little moral victory. Everyone would say how tasteful she was, how refreshing it was that she didn't need all the attention, and suddenly my wedding would look shallow. I stared at her. There it was. Not a misunderstanding, not panic, not protection. Jealousy, dressed up as logic. My mother pushed back from the table as if the words had physically touched her. Your sister invited us to her wedding, and you hid the invitations because you were afraid of being compared? Julia's eyes filled with tears instantly, but I knew those tears. I had watched them arrive my whole life whenever accountability came too close. I was under pressure, she said. Everyone expected my wedding to be perfect. I couldn't handle one more thing. Dad stood. One more thing? Ava's marriage was not one more thing. The sentence hit the room hard because my father had never defended me like that in front of Julia. Not once. Julia looked stunned, almost offended. Dad, I didn't think they'd actually care that much. They had Max's family there. She always acts like she doesn't need us. I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because the cruelty was so familiar, it almost sounded rehearsed. I acted like I didn't need you because needing you never changed anything. My mother covered her mouth. I did not stop. When I graduated, Julia had a breakup, so we left dinner early. When I got promoted, Julia announced her engagement the same weekend, and everyone forgot. When I moved into my first apartment, Dad missed it because Julia needed help choosing between two photographers. Every time I had a moment, somehow it became inconvenient for the family to notice. Julia snapped, "That's not fair." "No," I said. What wasn't fair was walking down the aisle without my father because my sister decided my happiness was bad timing. Dad looked down. That was the first time I saw shame cross his face without him trying to hide it. Mom's eyes were red now, but she was not looking at me. She was looking at Julia like she had found a stranger wearing her daughter's face. "Did you throw them away?" Mom asked. Julia wiped her cheek. "Mom, did you throw them away?" The second time, my mother's voice was sharper. Julia looked at the table. "I put them in my car." "Where are they now?" Dad asked. Julia swallowed. "I don't know." I answered quietly. "She knows." Julia glared at me. I pulled one last photo from the folder. It showed 3 cream envelopes torn in half inside a blue recycling bin behind my parents' garage. Max had taken the photo in November when we stopped by to drop off a pie for Thanksgiving and saw the corner of my own handwriting sticking out from a pile of catalogs. At the time, I had stood in the driveway unable to breathe. That was the day I stopped wondering whether the invitations had been lost. That was the day I knew they had been buried. My mother picked up the photo with shaking fingers. "You tore them?" Julia's voice cracked. I panicked. Dad slammed his palm on the table. The plates jumped. "You lied to us for 3 months." "I didn't lie," Julia cried. "Nobody asked." I leaned forward. Because nobody knew there was something to ask. That sentence ended the argument for a moment. Even Julia had nowhere to hide inside it. The Christmas music still played softly from the living room, cheerful and ridiculous, singing about peace while my family stared at the proof of what peace had cost me. Julia did what she always did when the room stopped believing her. She changed the subject from what she had done to how badly she felt. Her tears came harder. Her breathing turned shaky. She pressed both hands against her stomach and whispered, "I can't believe you're all attacking me on Christmas." A few years earlier, That would have worked. My mother would have rushed to her side. My father would have told everyone to calm down. I would have apologized for bringing it up at the wrong time, even though there had never been a right time for my pain. But that night, nobody moved. Mom stayed in her chair. Dad stayed standing. Max stayed beside me, silent but steady. Julia looked around and realized the old script had failed. That was when she turned on me fully. "You wanted this," she said. "You brought a folder to Christmas dinner. Who does that unless they're trying to humiliate someone?" I nodded slowly. Someone who learned that telling the truth without evidence gets called dramatic. Her mouth twisted. "You could have called me privately. You could have handed Mom an envelope." She flinched. I continued, calmer than I felt. "You don't get privacy for something you did publicly to my life. You let our parents sit through Christmas asking when my wedding would happen, while knowing they had already missed it." My mother let out a small sound, almost like a sob. I looked at her then, really looked at her. "And you, Mom, need to understand something too. Julia did this, yes. But she knew it would work because this family has practiced ignoring me for years." Mom whispered, "Ava, please don't say that." "Why? Because it hurts?" "It hurt when you spent months planning Julia's wedding and never once noticed I had stopped talking about mine. It hurt when you called me the easy daughter like that was love instead of convenience. It hurt when Dad said he only got one chance to give his daughter a wedding day, while I was sitting right here, already married." Dad closed his eyes. The room seemed to shrink around us. I reached into my bag and took out a small white envelope. Julia stared at it. She did not know what it was, and that scared her more than anything else. I placed it in front of my parents. "These are wedding photos, printed copies. I brought them because some part of me still wanted to give you a chance to see the day you missed." My mother reached for the envelope, but I placed my hand over it. "But before you open them, I need you to know what happens next." Julia wiped her face. "Oh my God, now there are conditions?" I looked at her. "Yes." That single word silenced her. From tonight forward, I am done funding peace in this family with my silence. I am done being the daughter who absorbs disrespect so everyone else can enjoy dessert. I am done pretending Julia's insecurity is more important than my dignity. Dad opened his mouth, but I kept going. "I will not come to family events where my life is treated like an afterthought. I will not answer calls demanding forgiveness because it is easier than accountability. And Julia, you will not have access to me, my home, my marriage, or any future child I may have until you learn the difference between being sorry and being exposed." Julia's face went pale. My mother whispered my name like she was watching me walk toward a cliff. But I was not falling. For the first time, I was standing. Julia pushed back her chair so hard it scraped the floor. "You can't cut me off over invitations." I stood too. "I'm not cutting you off over invitations. I'm cutting off the person who saw my happiness as a threat and decided the easiest solution was to erase it." She looked at Dad, desperate now. "Are you hearing this? She's trying to turn you against me." Dad's expression changed. Something old and blind finally broke in him. "No, Julia," he said. "You did that yourself." Julia froze. I think that was the moment she realized the punishment was not going to come from me yelling. It was going to come from everyone seeing her clearly. Mom stood slowly, tears on her cheeks. "You need to apologize to your sister." Julia gave a broken laugh. "I already said I panicked." "That is not an apology," Mom said. "That is an excuse." The words landed like a slap. Julia looked smaller than I had ever seen her, but I did not feel cruel. I felt awake. Max rose beside me and helped me with my coat. My mother reached toward me. "Ava, don't leave, please. We can fix this tonight." I shook my head. "No, Mom. You can start tonight." You can't fix years in one dinner. Then I picked up the envelope of wedding photos and held it out. You can keep these, not because you earned them, but because I refuse to let Julia be the only person who decided what you got to see. My father took the envelope with both hands. He looked like it weighed more than paper. I turned toward the door. Behind me, Julia began sobbing, but for once, her tears did not pull me back into the room. They followed me out like noise from a house I no longer belonged to in the same way. The cold outside hit my face, sharp and clean. For a second, I stood on the porch under my mother's carefully hung Christmas lights and felt nothing. Then Max wrapped my scarf around my neck, and I started shaking. Not because I regretted it, because my body had finally realized the fight was over. You did it, he said softly. I looked through the front window. Inside, my father was still standing with the envelope in his hands. My mother had sat down hard, one hand over her mouth. Julia was pacing near the table, crying into her phone, probably calling someone who would tell her she was the real victim. I don't feel victorious, I admitted. Max nodded. Truth doesn't always feel like victory at first. We drove back to Chicago in silence for the first 15 minutes. Snow moved through the headlights like static. My phone started ringing before we reached the highway. Mom. Dad. Mom again. Then a text from Julia. I hope you're happy. You ruined Christmas. I stared at it until the words blurred, then typed back. No. I ended a lie. After that, I blocked her. Not forever in some dramatic movie way. Just for the night. Then for the week. Then for as long as my peace needed protection. My parents did not get blocked. I let their messages come through, but I did not answer until the next morning. Mom sent a photo at 1:12 a.m. It was one of my wedding pictures. In it, Max and I stood outside the courthouse, laughing at something his brother had said. My dress was simple, long-sleeved, made from restored silk I had repaired myself from a damaged 1960s gown. Under the photo, Mom wrote, "You looked beautiful. I am so sorry I did not see you." That message hurt more than Julia's cruelty because it gave me the thing I had wanted too late. Dad sent his own message at 2:03 a.m. I failed you. I thought being proud of Julia meant I was being a good father. I didn't realize I was making you disappear. I know that is not enough, but it is true. I cried when I read that. Quietly, in the kitchen, while Max made coffee and pretended not to watch me too closely. Around noon, Dad called. I answered. His voice sounded rough. Ava, your mother and I talked all night. I said nothing. He continued. Julia admitted she tore the invitations after the album party. She said she was angry because your wedding sounded elegant and private, and she thought people would compare. I closed my eyes. Hearing the truth spoken plainly was different from proving it. Proof wins arguments. Confession wounds deeper. What happens now? I asked. Dad exhaled. We told her she needs to move out by the end of January. That surprised me. Julia had been living with them rent-free since August, supposedly to reset financially after overspending on her wedding. I knew my parents had been covering her car insurance too. We also told her we are no longer paying the balance on her wedding credit card, Dad added. I sat down slowly. You paid that? Silence. Then, some of it. The old Ava would have swallowed that detail and pretended it did not sting. The new Ava let the silence stretch until he understood it himself. I'm sorry, he said. For that too. Julia's consequences did not look like a public screaming match. They looked like the slow removal of privileges she had mistaken for love. My mother stopped defending her in group chats. My father stopped paying bills Julia had hidden behind tears. My aunt, after learning the truth, sent me a message that said, I wondered why your invitation never came. I'm sorry I didn't ask harder. Mara, Julia's friend, sent me the full conversation thread, and it was worse than I expected. Julia had mocked my dress before she ever saw it. She had written, "Ava probably thinks simple means superior." She had told people I was too emotionally detached to care whether family attended. That one made me laugh bitterly. Emotionally detached. That was what they called you when you stopped begging to be loved correctly. A week after Christmas, Julia emailed me. The subject line was apology. It was 5 paragraphs long. The first 2 were about her stress. The third was about how hard it was growing up feeling compared to me. The fourth finally said, "I should not have hidden your invitations." The fifth asked whether we could meet because mom and dad are acting like I'm dangerous. I did not respond immediately. I waited 2 days, then wrote back one sentence. "I am willing to read a real apology when it focuses on what you did, not what you feared." She did not reply for a while. That was fine. I had learned that silence could be a boundary, not just an absence. In January, my parents came to our apartment for dinner. Not a holiday, not a performance, just dinner. My mother brought flowers and cried when she saw one of our wedding photos framed on the shelf. My father stood in front of it for a long time, hands in his pockets, staring at the version of me he had missed. "I should have been there," he said. I did not comfort him. That may sound harsh, but comfort had always been my job in the Thompson family, and I was trying to retire from that role. "Yes," I said. "You should have." He nodded. No defense, no speech, just acceptance. That was the beginning of something honest, not fixed, not healed. Beginning. My mother asked if she could see the full wedding album. I said yes, but I also told her I would not sit through comments about how we should have done things differently, invited more people, chosen a bigger venue, or told her another way. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I don't get to edit a day I didn't attend." That was the first thing she said that made me believe she was learning. Julia did not come. She had moved into a small apartment with a roommate and, according to my father, was furious that consequences had arrived with rent. Part of me felt sad about that. Another part of me understood that sadness did not mean I had made the wrong choice. People often expect revenge to look loud, shouting, public humiliation, dramatic payback. But sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply removing yourself from the role that allowed someone to hurt you. Julia lost the version of our family where her tears erased her actions. My parents lost the comfort of pretending they had treated us equally. And I lost the exhausting habit of making myself invisible so everyone else could feel innocent. That was the real turning point. By spring, Julia sent a second apology. This one was shorter. Better. She wrote, "I was jealous. I wanted your wedding hidden because I was afraid people would admire you in a way they didn't admire me. That was cruel. You deserved your family there. I took that from you." I read it 3 times. Then I cried. Not because it fixed everything, but because for once she had named the wound correctly. I wrote back, "Thank you for saying it honestly. I'm not ready to rebuild yet." And that was enough. I did not owe instant forgiveness just because someone finally admitted the truth. Healing is not a door people get to kick open after they are done lying. It is a path, and the person who caused the damage does not get to choose the pace. Months later, Max and I hosted a small anniversary dinner. My parents came, Max's family came, my aunt came. Julia was not invited. That decision made my mother uncomfortable, but she did not challenge it. Progress sometimes sounds like silence from people who used to argue with your boundaries. Before dinner, Dad asked if he could make a toast. I hesitated, then nodded. He stood with a glass of sparkling cider and looked at me. Not over me, not through me, but at me. "To Ava and Max," he said. "I miss the day I should have witnessed, but I am grateful to be invited into the life you are building now. Thank you for giving us a chance to do better, even though we did not deserve it." My mother cried again. I almost did too. But this time, the tears did not come from feeling unseen. They came from realizing I no longer needed to beg for visibility. I had chosen it for myself. That Christmas taught me something I will never forget. Family is not proven by who shares your last name, sits at your table, or smiles in holiday photos. Family is proven by who protects your joy when you are not in the room. Julia had failed that test. My parents had failed it too, in quieter ways. But I had also been failing myself by waiting for people to hand me the value I should have claimed years earlier. So if you are listening to this, and you have ever felt like the invisible one, the reliable daughter, the quiet sibling, the person everyone assumes will understand, please hear me clearly. Being low maintenance does not mean you deserve low effort. Being forgiving does not mean you should become easy to erase. And keeping peace is not noble when the peace requires you to disappear. I still love my family, but I love myself differently now. I no longer attend every argument I am invited to. I no longer soften the truth so someone else can avoid shame. I no longer confuse being needed with being loved. My wedding was small, but it taught me something enormous. The people who truly belong in your life do not need to be chased with proof, receipts, or desperate explanations. They show up, and when they fail, they take responsibility without making you carry the weight of their guilt. That is the kind of love I want now. Not perfect love, honest love. So tell me in the comments, if your own sister or brother secretly hid your wedding invitations because they were jealous, would you forgive them? Or would you walk away until they learned what accountability really means?
My team and I are working hard to bring you stories that are engaging, emotional, and filled with messages that can be useful in real life. This video is completely fictional and created only for storytelling, entertainment, and education. We hope it encourages viewers to recognize their own value and never beg for respect from people who refuse to give it.